So, can you start by sharing your stance on DC statehood?
It's a non-negotiable. DC, the District of Columbia, is not a state, and it needs to be. It's very plain and simple. To me, it runs contrary to the very principles our country was founded on, of no taxation without representation. And as a DC resident, you have every responsibility of every other American in this country. You've got to pay federal taxes.
Yep.
I'm going to hold you accountable in a federal judicial system if you break the law. You can fight and die for your country, and yet you have no voice in the people that make those decisions. And I think it's wrong, but I don't think enough people really appreciate how patently unfair it is for the 700,000 of us that live here.
So, how do you view the current public sentiment regarding DC statehood? And do you think it's changed over time?
It certainly has gone through ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
I do think that's real. I remember marching in a statehood march that had 25 people in it. And I've also gone where it was thousands of people turning out. So I do think there's a bit of an ebb and flow that happens sometimes. I think it's hard also when people have been in this space disenfranchised for so long. Mm-hmm. It's easy to also be pretty cynical that it's ever going to change, right? We've also seen, regardless of political affiliation, we have seen people traditionally think of it as like, well, Democrats are going to support statehood, but Republicans don't. Yeah. We've seen Democrats, when it actually came down to it, walk away from us. So
and you know why that was? Was it
politics?
Politics, yeah.
We don't have the same political power as others, and so we will always be an easy mark when it comes to that. So famously, you guys were probably elementary school at this point, but President Barack Obama, who we all hold up pretty high in my book, right? When it came time for DC statehood, he famously gave away, literally he said the words to the then Republican Speaker of the House, "I'll give you DC." And it was around abortion rights and making sure that we could protect women's health. And it was a trading chip, not a principle. And that, I think, really makes people understandably very cynical.
Yeah. And I know over the years, several pieces of legislation have tried to be passed to grant DC statehood, and that's the new Columbia Admissions Act, the DC Statehood Bill in 1993. And so, I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenge in achieving DC statehood?
I do think it's politics.
Yeah.
I think getting enough people in the right position to vote for it is important. But just the other day, the mayor and the CFO, the chair of our council, was down at a hearing in front of the House. And there was a member from, I think it was Indiana, somewhere in that area, but a Republican member. And they were talking about something else, but she just felt like she needed to get it out. And she says, I just want to make it clear, I don't support statehood. It's just a power grab by Democrats to have more votes here. If that's her belief, which I know I can appreciate that in her head, she thinks that's the talking point she's supposed to say for her Republican colleagues. But what she's saying is, you value less as an American because your political beliefs may not line up exactly with her political beliefs. That's a whole nother level of cynicism, right? That I somehow can't respect a fundamental right that we don't have to agree on the same thing. We could want very different futures for our country and for our families, for our community. But I still believe you're an American. I believe you have all the rights and responsibilities that come with that.
Of course. That
we have people that can't get to that is really scary. And we're going to have to overcome that. And I think one of the ways you do it is you have to appeal to people around just a sense of decency and fairness. My brother lives in Tennessee. He has 2 kids that are the same age as mine. I frequently talk about it this way, of like, tell me what's fair and what's not fair. My daughter's 12 right now. Her cousin is 12 years old. My daughter lives in DC. Her cousin lives in Tennessee. In Tennessee, they have the exact same responsibilities of being an American as my daughter does. but they get to have 2 senators, a vote in the House, and full federal representation. And my daughter doesn't. They're the same age. They're the same in the same family. Tell me how that's fair. And it's not. And I think the more that we appeal to people on very personal levels, people that you know, family members, then that woman from Indiana who can't see past whatever talking point she's supposed to believe will chip away at it.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. That was great. But I mean, how would statehood benefit the residents of DC? This, I mean, in political power and resources and representation. I mean, how do you?
Well, we can think about today. Congress right now. I know we're doing documentaries, so it's hard to like do days. But I'll give an example.
Yeah.
Right now, Congress is debating how to keep the federal government funded. But one of the things that they were going to have in there was that the RFK Stadium site, this piece of land, would get transferred to the district. Not necessarily for an NFL stadium, but it should be our decision what goes there. To accomplish that, DC was going to have to give up its Air National Guard unit, which is kind of nuts. Other states were able to use it as negotiating powers to say, well, if you're going to give this to DC, then I want this. We had nobody at the table because we have no representation, right? So the lack of statehood immediately means in a decision like that, we have no representation. But there's other ways that it impacts every single resident. Think about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court makes decisions about your life, about your family's life, about people that you love and care about. When a judge is being nominated and goes through a Senate confirmation process, we literally have no vote as to whether or not we think that person is fit for that role or not. I am okay losing a vote as long as I know I had a voice, right? If I had a senator and the majority ended up voting a different way than I wanted, but I knew that my voice counted because I had representation, I can stomach that a lot better than I'm completely powerless in whatever this decision is going to be, and yet that decision impacts my life.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've encountered that as well, that we don't think, I mean, even in the political, it's the DC's vote just doesn't matter, I mean, towards presidential campaigns and whatnot. But during our research, we encountered the argument that the Constitution requires a federal district separate from states. So how would you address this claim and this argument, I guess?
It's actually a really important one.
Yeah.
And the law that we have put forward and that we're asking Congress to pass addresses that. And what it does is it creates a federal and maintains a federal district. But it shrinks the federal district to what is commonly thought of as the federal district, right? The White House, the Capitol, the monuments, the mall. Draw that map down to what the federal district actually is. There is no scenario where the founding fathers thought that way out up in Chevy Chase or Anacostia, which were basically farmland at the time, that those were going to be, those had to be important for the national capital. They had no idea people would actually live there. They had no concept that 700,000 people would be living here. I would argue if they did, the principle that they had just won an entire war and revolution over would have said, yeah, those people get to have a vote. They get to have statehood. The founding fathers did not envision this in what we all live in today. They thought it was going to be a federal district where people came in to cast votes and the federal functions happened and people went back out to their states. It is fundamentally different than that of which what they originally envisioned. And so I do think a federal district is important. I agree with that. And the law that would make the District of Columbia a state would preserve a federal district while granting us statehood.
And the district has a population over 700,000, as you said, and which is larger than some states. And do you think that this population size plays a role in the argument for DC statehood?
I think some people think it does.
Yeah.
But of course, we have more people that live here than in Wyoming. That's a pretty large state.
Yeah.
They have 2 senators and a House of Rep member. We have more people that live here. We are larger than Vermont. Most people don't realize that. They have 2 senators and a full rep. We are larger population-wise. We're about the same as North Dakota and Alaska population-wise. But no one ever bats an eye to say, of course, they've got senators, right? So I think it's not necessarily the population size, it's the geography. I think people look and say, well, but you're so small. Well, we're 100% urban space. Um, but you know what? Rhode Island's pretty tiny too. So
Yeah,
I don't think that's the metric.
that's great. I mean, some of these states they're big, but it's not all condensed as it is in DC.
Right.
And another issue, I know you brought it up, is taxation, and another phrase is taxation without representation. And DC residents contribute billions of dollars in federal taxes each year, but still lack a member in the House of Representatives and have no senators to advocate for their needs on a national level. So how would statehood address the issue of taxation without representation?
Well, with statehood, we would immediately have representation on the federal taxes that you and I pay. It's just so fundamental to what our country was founded on. It boggles my mind when I have people who love to talk about how much they love this country. Oh, but except for that part. I just don't like that part of the country. And it really, they're kind of telling on themselves when they say that, because it's clear they just don't like they don't like who lives there. And I think there's, a very clear amount of racism that goes into this. And they don't like how those people vote. And so we are those people to them. And so they don't like the way that we vote as a majority, even though we actually have a fairly diverse political perspectives in our city. The statement, though, of taxation without representation, if you remember our DC license plates a couple of years ago, the statement was taxation without representation. I actually led the effort of the council to change it to what it says now, which is end taxation without representation. Because for me, I would rather my license plate be a call to action than a statement of what is. And having our license plates just say taxation without representation, to me, isn't what I want to achieve. It's just a statement of what is. I would rather have it say end taxation without representation. And that's what our license plates say today.
Yeah. And so just to round it all up, what role do you think that local leaders and residents play in the conversation of DC statehood, and how can they contribute?
Well, I think exploring it like this for a National History Day project, which I hope gets more and more attention, and perhaps as a platform that you're able to then take out to other states and talk to other students, right? I think there's immense value in that. I said earlier, one of the ways that I think we're actually going to change this is by having that person in Indiana or Arkansas or North Dakota understand why this matters to them. And they're really going to understand it on a very personal level. It's going to be, a family member or a friend that you have that lives in that place that says, oh, you know what? That does seem unfair, right? Or when you guys go to college, let's say you don't go to college here in DC, you go somewhere else, and you're going to meet people from all over the country, right? Talking about it in that space helps educate your friends that are from all over this country. And because they get to know you and like you, it's the type of thing where it's easy. I mean, think about the rhetoric you hear in politics about DC, right? We're going to drain the swamp, right? That's nuts, but that's what people say. When you can make the District of Columbia into a symbol of something that it's not, you can get people into a headspace where they say, I don't really care what happens to them. I don't know what they are. They're just this federal morass and swamp, right? And then they get to meet you. They're like, well, I like that guy. That guy seems pretty smart. I like him. And it's really hard for somebody to look at you and say, you're less of an American. You don't get the same rights as me. That's a hard thing to do to somebody face to face. So it will take more and more face-to-face personal interactions, I think, to get people to say, yeah, no, like you're a pretty good guy. I really don't have a reason as to why I get to be more of an American than you are. And I think that's what it'll take to kind of turn the tide.
Yeah, well, I mean, that wraps up all my questions, Gael. If you want to have any other points. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
This has really been
I appreciate
a great use of time.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, we really appreciate you letting us in here and letting us ask a couple of questions.
You got it. Good luck with the project.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.